The Beijing summit just ended, 2 days, the Great Hall of the People, Trump and Xi Jinping, the most anticipated diplomatic meeting of this conflict, the summit that was supposed to change the trajectory of the Iran war. Here is what came out of it. Trump arrived in Beijing having spent 76 days threatening China for purchasing Iranian oil. His Treasury Secretary called China the largest funder of state terrorism. His Secretary of State warned on Air Force One that any support for Iran would obviously be detrimental for our relationship. The entire diplomatic architecture of America's Iran strategy has been built on the premise that China must stop buying Iranian oil, that cutting China off from Iranian crude would deny Iran the economic lifeline that has kept it viable throughout the conflict. Trump left Beijing considering lifting sanctions on the Chinese companies that buy Iranian oil. He arrived threatening, he left rewarding.
I want to spend the next 20 minutes explaining what that reversal reveals about who had the upper hand at the Beijing summit and what it means for the war that American families have been paying for since February 28th. What Trump went to Beijing to achieve and what he got. Let me be precise about what the American diplomatic objective at the Beijing summit was, because the gap between the objective and the outcome is the most revealing fact of the last 76 days. America's stated position before the summit was that China must reduce or eliminate its purchases of Iranian crude. This is the position that produced the largest funder of state terrorism language from Bessent. This is the position that produced Rubio's warning on Air Force One. This is the position that has driven American secondary sanctions, targeting Chinese companies and Chinese financial institutions that processed Iranian oil revenue throughout the conflict. The logic of that position was if China stops buying Iranian oil, Iran's export revenue collapses, Iran's economic foundation for continuing the Hormuz closure disappears, and Iran is forced to accept American terms for a deal. That logic required China to cooperate. China did not cooperate. China's shadow fleet continued delivering Iranian crude above pre-war export levels throughout the conflict. China's CIEPS payment system processed Iran's oil revenue outside American financial controls. China's strategic reserves insulated Chinese markets from the energy shock that was supposed to create pressure on Beijing. America went to Beijing to change this. America left Beijing considering lifting the sanctions that were supposed to enforce it. The summit produced no substantive agreements on key issues. Both countries agreed that Iran can never have a nuclear weapon, a statement of principle that both sides agreed on before the first American bomb fell on Iran on February 28th. Trump invited Xi to visit the United States in September. Both sides said they wanted to describe the meeting as a win. The Hormuz Strait is still closed to 90% of commercial shipping. Gasoline costs 52% more than before this conflict began. 13 Americans are dead. Harvard projects the total cost will reach $1 trillion. And Trump left Beijing considering lifting sanctions on the companies buying Iranian oil. What considering lifting sanctions actually means, let me explain what the sanctions consideration tells you, because I think it is being framed as a diplomatic concession when it is something more structurally significant. America's sanctions on Chinese companies buying Iranian oil were the primary economic instrument through which America was trying to deny Iran its economic lifeline. They were not peripheral. They were the core mechanism of the maximum pressure strategy as applied to China. Bessent calling China a terrorism funder was the rhetorical escalation designed to justify exactly these sanctions in the American domestic political space. If Trump lifts those sanctions, or even signals that he is considering lifting them, it tells every Chinese company currently hesitating about Iranian oil purchases that the American enforcement threat is negotiable. The signal value of even considering the lift is enormous. The shadow fleet operators, the independent refineries, the trading companies that have been navigating around American enforcement, all of them just received a signal that the enforcement regime is softer than the rhetoric suggested. This is the structural consequence of leaving Beijing with a sanction lift under consideration. Not the lift itself, the signal. and signals in energy markets move prices and behavior before any policy change is formally announced. It also tells Iran something specific. Iran watched the summit from Tehran, where the IRGC is still conducting Operation Martyr Commander, the 5-day military exercise that was launched on the day Trump landed in Beijing. Iran watched America arrive, threatening China with sanctions, and leave, considering lifting them. Iran's strategic calculation, that time is on its side, that American pressure will eventually produce American accommodation, just received its most significant confirmation since the conflict began. What China got from the summit and what it cost China, I want to address what China received from this summit because the coverage is presenting the meeting as a diplomatic draw. Both sides got something, both sides wanted to call it a win. I want to examine what China actually got. China received three things of strategic significance. First, a signal on Taiwan. Wang Yi, China's foreign minister, said after the summit that Beijing senses Trump understands China's position and does not support Taiwan moving toward independence. This is the most significant Taiwan related statement an American president has allowed since the conflict began. She said Taiwan was the most important issue in U.S. China relations, and the summit ended with Wang Yi interpreting Trump's behavior as understanding China's position. This is not a formal concession. It is a signal that the American position on Taiwan has softened in the context of America's need for Chinese cooperation on Iran. America needed China's help with Iran. China extracted a Taiwan signal in return. Second, the sanction consideration. Chinese companies buying Iranian oil just received a presidential signal that the enforcement regime they have been navigating may be relaxed. This is economically significant for the companies involved and strategically significant for China's position as Iran's economic lifeline. Third, the framework for a continuing relationship. Trump invited Xi to visit the United States in September. Both sides agreed to develop a constructive strategic stability relationship. The summit's failure to produce substantive agreements on Iran does not mean it failed for China. China came to the summit needing the bilateral relationship stabilized, not needing to solve the Iran problem. The relationship was stabilized. China's objective was met. What did it cost China? Nothing on Iran, nothing on the shadow fleet, nothing on the Iranian oil purchases, nothing on the economic architecture that has kept Iran viable throughout the conflict. China went to this summit having profited from the Iran war for 76 days. It left having signaled that it will continue to be the indispensable party in whatever eventual settlement is reached, while paying no price for 76 days of Iranian oil purchases that America called state terrorism funding. What Iran's foreign minister said, and why it matters, Iran's foreign minister said after the summit that Iran welcomes any diplomatic efforts from China. I want to explain what that specific statement tells you about Iran's assessment of the summit's outcome. Iran's foreign minister did not say Iran welcomes any diplomatic efforts from the United States. Iran specifically welcomed China's diplomatic efforts. The distinction is deliberate. Iran is signaling that it views China, not America, as the diplomatic actor it is willing to engage. And it is doing this publicly immediately after the summit that was supposed to produce American diplomatic leverage over China on Iran. Iran watched America arrive in Beijing, threatening China. Iran watched America leave Beijing, considering lifting sanctions on China. And Iran's foreign minister responded by welcoming China's diplomatic efforts, positioning China as the party that has credibility in Tehran, not America. This is the specific diplomatic outcome that the Economist Intelligence Unit's principal economist for China described when she said before the summit that there are limits to what China can realistically do because the Iranian regime is operating in survival mode and will prioritize its own interests above all else. Iran's survival mode means Iran makes its own decisions. Iran is not waiting for China or America or Russia to determine its policy. It is calculating based on its own assessment of its position. And its foreign minister's statement after the Beijing summit, welcoming China's efforts, specifically not America's, tells you that Iran's assessment of its position has not changed. The Taiwan trade, what America gave away. I want to address the Taiwan dimension directly because I think it is the most underreported element of the Beijing summit in the context of the Iran war. Wang Yi said after the summit that Beijing senses Trump understands China's position on Taiwan and does not support Taiwan independence. She said Taiwan was the most important issue in US China relations and that mishandling it could lead to collision or conflict between Washington and Beijing. America went to Beijing to talk about Iran. It left with China having extracted a Taiwan signal. The connection between the Taiwan signal and the Iran war is specific. America needed China's cooperation on Iran badly enough to attend a summit in Beijing, while Bessent had called China a terrorism funder 2 weeks earlier. That level of need creates leverage for the party whose cooperation is being sought. China used that leverage to extract a Taiwan signal. America did not come to Beijing to make concessions on Taiwan. It came to pressure China on Iran, but the gap between America's diplomatic need, Chinese cooperation on Iran, and China's strategic priority, Taiwan, meant that any substantive meeting would involve China raising Taiwan, and it did. And Wang Yi's post-summit statement tells you how China assessed the result. America's strongest diplomatic asset in Asia, its commitment to Taiwan's security, was signaled as softer at a summit that was convened to pressure China over Iran. And the summit ended with no substantive agreements on Iran. That is the specific cost of the diplomatic framework that produced the Beijing summit. What the oil price will tell you: the summit ended, the Hormuz Strait is still closed, gasoline costs 52% more, Harvard projects $1 trillion in total costs, and Trump left considering lifting sanctions on Chinese companies buying Iranian oil. I said before this summit to watch three things: the oil price, Iran's language, whether the military exercise ends early. The oil price rose after Trump told Fox News that China has agreed to buy U.S. oil, a trade-related announcement unconnected to Iran. It did not drop significantly in response to any Iran-related agreement because no Iran-related agreement was announced. Iran's language after the summit was welcoming of China's diplomatic efforts, not of American diplomatic efforts, not conciliatory toward Washington. The military exercise, Operation Martyr Commander, was launched for 5 days on the day Trump landed in Beijing. Watch whether it ends on schedule or runs beyond its announced duration. Trump went to Beijing to punish China over Iran. He left considering lifting the sanctions that were the punishment. The summit produced a photo, a September invitation, and a Taiwan signal that China will use for years, and Hormuz is still closed.